Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello.
And it finally seems like the war on loot boxes might be coming to an end.
Kind of, I hope so. Certainly a battle won in the war against loot boxes, because yesterday the ESA, that is the Entertainment Software Association, reported that Nintendo, Microsoft and Sony are all kind of banding together to introduce new policies that are going to reveal the odds of their loot box drop rates.
Good.
Other companies have done this in the past and it's been pushed for on a kind of case-by-case basis, but earlier last year I think, or maybe this year, Apple and Google introduce these policies on their app stores, and every single like mobile game has to do this now if you want to release on those stores. And the fact that the three big sort of console makers are coming together and joining forces essentially to implement these changes at a kind of ground level and a publisher by publisher level, that is a huge win.
I think psychologically, because it's weird, because I'm interested to see where it goes from here. I wonder how much money loot boxes make based on the fact that it is that sort of unknown quantity. It is the fact that, you know, you can introduce an element where you are essentially just spinning a wheel and seeing what comes out the other side. Whereas if you literally look at the statistics, if it says like, okay, you have a 1 in 10 million chance of getting something, assumedly that would dissuade people from doing it. Because I remember, just as a weird sort of personal example, when I was younger, I remember when you see like the lottery, I'm assuming they have the lottery around the world.
Of course they do, yeah.
Other than the UK, you know, you watch the lottery, and I was like, well, I can win like I can win £1,000 if I did a thing. And then like, you know, wanting to do that when you're a kid, and then looking at the drop rates and being like, I'm never ever going to do this, and just gradually moving away from it.
Yes.
So I think I think that's going to affect it a lot.
Interesting that you use the lottery analogy there, because obviously the odds on that are ridiculous, and yet millions of people still, you know, buy into it. I don't know if this is going to necessarily kind of stop people buying loot boxes just because they know the odds. Already we kind of know that it's going to be a small chance that you get a sort of legendary skin or whatever. You have to buy the higher tiers to get a higher chance. So the odds system is kind of there in players' minds, but it's not sort of laid out like it should be, where you have the exact statistics of the chances of, say, getting one of those legendary skins.
Because they brought in Overwatch, or Blizzard had to start disclosing Overwatch's drop rates in China, and I don't know how much that's affected their revenue since then. I know Belgium had the whole pushback against Battlefront 2. I just think that, like I said, psychologically, I think it affects just the appeal of a loot box.
Yes.
Which is the thing that EA tried to hang the whole thing on when they were being interrogated as to you know, why they keep putting them in games, and they said that people really like them. People like they call them surprise mechanics and whatever. And I think that's just really fascinating if the big companies get behind it and say, well, actually, we're going to remove the element of surprise. And then, you know, is that the thing that even if you try and say that they're a good thing, obviously there's going to be people out there who love loot boxes, otherwise they wouldn't be so profitable. If you remove that surprise element, is that going to, you know, demonstrably affect their worth to the people that even enjoy this
Well,
stuff?
It's really kind of fascinating, because I was thinking this would, you know, might dissuade people of buying into it if you know there's only a 10% chance that you'll get a really good item. But for me, say there's a 30% chance.
Right.
I might be more likely to buy one.
Oh, no.
Which sounds really bad. If I know the exact odds and I know there's a 30% chance, I might take that risk. I might be like, those are good odds, baby. Here's my money.
No, I think because this comes after Epic have asked Rocket League to remove the loot boxes that they have, which, like, the way that I always get the developer name wrong. It's Psyonix. The way that they sort of do their loot boxes is that a whole chunk of that money goes towards the Rocket League esports stuff and the cups and the tournaments and everything. So they have to kind of rejig the way that they work their overall finances. But it just seems like there's a bit of an industry shift against this stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of bad press, like I said before, about Belgium and the fact that Battlefront 2 felt like a tipping point at some point.
Yes.
And like Rockstar with the online casino, there's like, we've reported on that being like, you know, you can put real money into it and then use it at the casino. Not a one-to-one transaction, but you can put real money into your GTA economy and then take that into the casino. Although Rockstar have implemented things to try and separate those currencies. Still, I don't think that you should have to go through so many hoops to understand where your money's going or whatever. All of this stuff kind of goes around the idea of, you know, that idea of betting with real money in games. I think if we're going to go forward with that as an industry, I think those things need to be separated more.
Yeah. What's interesting to me about this is that I want to know what the impact is. Like you said, they've already introduced this with Overwatch in China, but we don't really know how that's impacted the profitability of loot boxes. And I wonder, the cynical part of me wonders if this is just kind of an easy win for the publishers to net some good PR around loot boxes and be like, look, we are making changes. We're not getting rid of them. We're just making, you know, positive alterations to the core mechanics that lets us keep them in the games while also making people like us not so annoyed about them being there because they're making steps.
There's such a weird thing to talk about because I am for like 90% against them. I totally think that I think when publishers give into them and give into the whole corporate side of it, and they just want to make money, and they do take advantage of different fandoms to go, okay, this, like you said, this skin is locked behind a 1 in 10,000 chance or whatever. I think that stuff is very predatory, and I think it hurts the overall game experience and your enjoyment over time. But having known some people, or do know some people that work as developers in the industry, I think it's interesting to at least try and go to the idea of like, okay, if this game is post-release, where are those wages going to come from a team that is continuing to support that game? And is there a way to do it like sort of more friendly? It seems like Apex Legends didn't really get chastised for it because they very openly said, look, it's just skins, don't worry about it. Whereas on the other side, you've got this kind of post-launch, like I said, predatory sort of thing with Crash Team Racing or Metal Gear Solid 5 or Black Ops 4, where microtransaction stores get added to the games after the fact, and different numbers and statistics get tweaked in the game to encourage you to then go and spend.
Well, it's funny you should mention those games, Scott, because I have a list of publishers who have already signed up to these new policies and have committed themselves to introducing them before the end of 2020.
Surely they'll all have to at some point.
Well, no, because well,
what else are they going to go? Google Stadia?
Because I suppose you're right, but the thing is, they can figure ways out. They might introduce their own launches for all we know. Okay. But the companies that have committed so far are Activision Blizzard, Bandai Namco Entertainment, Bethesda, Bungie, Electronic Arts, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, obviously, Take-Two Interactive, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers Interactive, and Wizards of the Coast. This is all from Games Industry Biz.
That covers everybody.
A lot of the biggies, definitely.
I mean, CD Projekt Red weren't on there, but it's not like Cyberpunk's going to be having. Well, assumedly, you're not going to have some sort of random elements to it.
You'd hope not.
But in terms of all the umbrella publishers that cover the vast majority of games that we all love to talk about in the AAA space, that feels like it covers pretty much everybody.
I think so. I mean, it's like those big umbrellas, and it's interesting to see people like EA and Activision signing on so readily when a bunch of, there's a couple of developers and publishers that haven't yet committed to doing these policies. The end of 2020 window, that seems quite far away. I wonder if they'll stick to it by the time that rolls around, but I hope so, especially because, like we said, the big pull here is Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. The fact that you have the big three platform holders pushing for this kind of change means that everyone kind of has to follow suit, even if they don't want to eventually.
That's what I'm thinking in terms of, like you said, if you go down, because obviously it's all business. Obviously none of the people at the very top counting the statistics really care. Like, we're all very much aware of that stuff. And there will be individuals as part of those companies that do care, obviously. But there's going to be a business reality to changing the statistics that much when there's this much money at play. But especially if you go back through like the last generation to now, like for a while the contingent spending model, continuous spending model was season passes. And then everyone got sick of that because they couldn't maintain the amount of content for a season pass. Arkham Knight kind of rolled it out, but they didn't know what they were going to do initially. Fallout 4 kind of struggled to put things together, or Bethesda did, and that sort of became microtransactions, and they did away with the idea of a season pass. I remember Mass Effect Andromeda's season pass was just nothing, and then they just cancelled it, and everyone who had the deluxe edition didn't really get anything.
Good, brilliant.
So and it's like, if you're gonna, like, it seems like the industry needs something, this sort of post-launch, it needs this recurrent spending model, but it needs to be done in a way that I think is honest, very open about what we're getting. And it just needs to be a mechanic that we kind of accept. I feel like the way loot boxes have been put in and modified isn't really in a very palatable. They
just need to be honest. Although season passes and loot boxes are very different, it's interesting that publishers and developers both relied on these two methods to kind of support games in the long term. But the one thing they do have in common is that oftentimes you would just be buying a promise and you wouldn't really know what you were going to get. If you were buying a season pass before the game even came out, a lot of the time there might be a vague roadmap. You might have a title for a story expansion, but the majority of the time you wouldn't know what that story expansion was actually going to be until you actually paid money, and then a few months down the line there was a trailer for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Like, there's always been an element of mystery and kind of an implied trust on behalf of the kind of a customer to just buy into these services without knowing what they are. And I think that is kind of breaking down, and we need companies to be more transparent. And although I would like loot boxes to be eradicated, entirely in favor of a different monetization model, the fact that they're even trying to be more transparent is ultimately a good thing.
Well, and plus in terms of the transparency thing and the honesty thing, it's like, do you keep in-game storefronts, but you're very upfront about, like, this will cost this much money, and then you have to tweak your progression system so that we don't feel the incentive to fall back on buying stuff. Because I remember with Mortal Kombat 11, even though NetherRealm swore blind that they weren't trying to encourage microtransaction spending, and I want to believe them, I like the studio, with MK11, that game was impossibly difficult at launch, to the point where you were sort of just encouraged to go to the microtransaction store was implemented 1 week later when they then patched matched the difficulty. But a lot of those elements seem to come together where it was like, well, if you can't get through the tower, maybe you want to pay to get around it. And it's like, that's where the sort of the cold business practice sort of comes in again, where it's like, okay, this, like, and as gamers, we're so aware of that stuff. Like, you know, it's not like we're all like born yesterday. Like, nearly all of us are like of age to remember a time when the gaming industry didn't have these practices. You know, and when DLC came in, and all of a sudden it was day one DLC, and then that sort of kind of got abused. And like, it just seems like there's always a new thing that comes in. It gets stretched to breaking point. It breaks, and then something new comes in. So I kind of hope this is the beginning of the end for loot boxes, but I think something else will come in again.
I have a slight counter argument to this.
Go on.
I worry that this might swing the loot boxes all the way back around, because over the past couple of months, maybe even a year, we've seen publishers and developers commit to not putting loot boxes in their games. Even Jedi Fallen Order, the big selling point of that game for many is EA going, look, this is going to be
and
no
we're
loot
not
boxes
being
here,
terrible.
and we're not being terrible for once. We're not going to do this again.
Good.
But I wonder if this sort of policies like this, which kind of soften the blow or certainly put a positive PR spin on loot boxes and microtransactions, might spin it around to publishers and developers getting confident again that they can re-implement these practices and kind of get away with it. I don't know,
but I mean,
I hope not.
That just that kind of just is the industry. I think it only benefits like you guys and everybody to be a more aware, more learned and intelligent consumers. It always benefits you to look back over gaming history and look over the different times that these things have been tried, implemented, and like I said, broken, and then it all gets reset again. So I wonder how much this will affect, like I said, the psychological elements of surprise mechanics and how much the surprise is there. If you remove that, does that affect the bottom line of how much people are going to invest in it? I'm curious, but I think this is a step in the right direction. I think once you remove the one thing that people enjoy about loot boxes, which is the surprise stuff, once you remove that, I hope that's the beginning of the end for at least the current iteration of the most predatory loot boxes.
Even if it isn't, like you just said there, like players weren't born yesterday. We pushed back against practices so many times over the years. On-disc DLC, season passes, all that kind of stuff. We just got sick of, and then developers eventually got the memo and, canned it and introduced something else. So even if this doesn't work, that pushback is still going to be there, and at some point, they will eventually cave. So I think the battle will be won.
The battle is continuing, but for now, it seems like a good thing. Let us know down in the comments below, though. Like, what do you think they can do about loot boxes and the idea of recurrent spending models and how to support devs post-launch? For now, though, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Do it again.